Your source for everything paranormal. Parax. Throughout the ages, history has been altered by word of mouth and the misrepresentation of those who might not have been present when some of the world's most significant events took place. Channelers Barry and Connie Strohm bring through the spirits of those who actually witnessed or took part in these historical events and lets them tell their stories in their own words. Welcome to Channeling History. And now, here are your hosts, Barry and Connie Strohm.
Good evening, everybody, and welcome to Channeling History. We're the only show where we speak to the souls that make things happen. We're also the only show where all of our guests have passed and are on the other side. Our show is brought to you on the Parax Radio Network. One thing we want you to know is a little bit of a disclaimer as we start. The opinions or statements that are voiced on our show are the channeled words of the spirits and do not necessarily reflect our opinions, those of Parax Network, or our sponsors. In fact, when I'm channeling, I often don't know I don't remember the words that I'm speaking. I often have to go back and re-listen to the show or read a transcript so I know the words that the Spirit spoke to me. I'm Barry Strohm, I'm your host, and I will be doing the channeling tonight.
And I am your co-host, Connie Strohm, and we would like to thank you for joining us once again this evening. Tonight, we'll be channeling with the spirit of one of the early servants of God, Moses. His story is told in the book of Exodus in the Bible and the Torah as well. The Gospels tell us that he led the Israelites to the Promised Land, wandered in the desert for 40 years, and lived to be 120 years old. Tonight, we will separate fact from fiction. So if you have any questions for Moses, please submit them into the chat room. We like to have your input.
Most of our shows are going to be dedicated to interviewing historic and famous figures. We're planning on multiple special shows in the future that we hope will help solve mysteries and maybe even some unsolved crimes. We're going to be doing a show about Jack the Ripper. We'll do one on D.B. Cooper and many other crimes that have gone unsolved. In April, we're planning on doing a show on the Titanic. We'll be doing it on the anniversary of the sinking. We're planning to interview the captain of the ship and hopefully others that unfortunately perished on board during the great accident. We value your input on future shows, so please submit suggestions. Submit them on who we should have as spirit guests. Our email is channelinghistory on parax@gmail.com. That's channelinghistory on parax@gmail.com.
Okay, so as I've told you before, we're going to be channeling historic figures, many of whom were involved in historic conspiracies. We'll also be talking to the Holy Spirits from different religious backgrounds because we believe in letting everybody have their say. We even at some point will be channeling with archangels. Our spirits guests will be from all walks of life. We've got Buddha lined up, Marilyn Monroe, John Lennon would like to speak to you, and other figures of interest. So anyway, once again, we really welcome your questions through the chat room. We like to know what is on your mind.
Yes, next week, as she said, we are going to be doing an interview with Buddha. We did him before on our YouTube channel, and he is a wonderful subject. He lived approximately 600 years before the birth of Christ, and he brings an entirely different outlook into how people considered the universal God and how they lived those early lives. Tonight, we hope that you will submit questions to us through the chat room. When we begin our channeling tonight, Connie will ask the questions and I will answer them. When you hear my voice, once we start, that will be the words of Moses, and he will be speaking to us. We talked to him before the show. He's with us. The guides have brought him to us tonight, and I think it's going to be very, very interesting. So anyway, let's get things started. And if you've listened to us before, you realize that we always start our channeling with a prayer of protection. When we begin to learn this thing many years ago, the guides told us specifically that never ever invite evil into the channel once you begin. So here we go. We're going to have Connie say the prayer, and then we will get things started.
God, please grant us your wisdom and protection. Grant us the knowledge that we can handle and keep us safe from all things that will harm us. Keep the messages positive and pure love. Keep us safe from our egos. We ask these things in the light of the seen, the unseen, and the honesty of God. Amen. So Moses, would you like to start with a message for our listeners?
Yes, I am very honored that you have invited me to come back. When I spoke with you last year, we had a very interesting conversation, and I tried to answer many of your questions. I'm very happy that you have once again given me the opportunity to come forward. I lived my life at a very, very difficult time. It was long before the birth of Christ, so Christianity obviously never existed at the time. The Egyptians worshipped their idols and their gods. They felt very strongly that members of what is now the Jewish faith, who we will talk about as the Israelites, the Egyptians were very upset that the Israelites would not worship their deities or gods. As time progressed with the Israelites, the Egyptians regarded them more as slaves and would use them to do some of the most menial tasks. And as a result, they were mistreated in many, many different ways. So it was a very difficult time for all of us, just as you are living in very difficult times today. There is much hatred among people. There is much hatred among governments, and that hatred will reflect itself in the actions of how people will react to governmental actions in your future. The one thing that it seems the human race is very slow at learning is the need for everyone to get along. Until humans learn that, it will be a very, very difficult time for their evolution. So, I know you have a bunch of questions for me, and I'm hoping the questions come in from people that are listening. I will welcome them. So with that, why don't we start to try to answer some of the questions that you have prepared.
Okay, let's start at the very beginning. There's a lot of controversy over the date of your birth. Approximately what year before the birth of Christ were you born?
I was born approximately 1,500 years before the birth of Christ. That was at the height of the Egyptian power, and as I said, it was a very, very difficult time. But it was long before anyone ever conceived of the word Christianity.
Okay. You're obviously a servant of God. Did you ever serve him before your life as Moses?
Yes, I had served him several times before on earth. I was among some very early cultures that were trying to bring humans closer to the traits that you understand today. I also served him on many other planets on different times. But that is another subject.
Would you tell us about reincarnation?
Reincarnation is the key to a soul advancing in the realms of heaven. When you are on this side, your soul has to decide if it wants to return and learn lessons that needed to be learned. In order to advance over here, people have to learn lessons. They have to learn suffering. They have to understand the grief. They must sadly understand pain. There are many things that they must learn. But through all those lessons, hopefully they learn the lesson that it is much easier to love than it is to hate.
True. Have you lived any lifetimes since that of Moses?
No, I have not. Since the life of Moses, I have tried to serve God on this side of the veil. I do missions as are requested of me, and should it ever be requested of me to return, I would be happy to do so. But no, I have not served any incarnate lives since the one I lived as Moses 3,500 years ago.
Okay, why did God pick that particular time to have you return?
He picked that particular time because the Israelites were being heavily mistreated, and it was possible that they could have been wiped out of existence at the whim of the Pharaoh. It had taken many, many years to unite the tribes and bring them together into one place. It was always in the long-term plan of God that those Israelites, after they had assimilated and confirmed the fact that they would worship the one God, would be led to a land where they would be free to worship and would not have to worry about being enslaved or perhaps being wiped out at the whim of a Pharaoh.
Okay, we have a question from the chat room. Were the Israelites descendants of Abraham?
Yes, as I was a descendant of Abraham.
Okay. That is written about you in the Old Testament. How accurate are the writings in the Old Testament?
In general, the writings in the Old Testament are very inaccurate. We find that the writings did not begin until 300 to 400 years before the birth of Christ. That was over 1,000 years after the time that I lived and the time that the Israelites were led to the Promised Land. There was no written record of what we did. And obviously stories changed much over the years. When people began to record religious writings, they often had no way of understanding what had really happened. For instance, there was no way that someone living 200 to 300 years before the birth of Christ could ever conceive of how humans were brought to the earth. They came up with the story of Adam and Eve because that was the only way that they thought that a human could be conceived. So in general, the ideas of the Old Testament are accurate, but specifically, many of the definite stories that occur in the Old Testament have been exaggerated or even made up. You will find that even though there are inaccuracies in the New Testament, it is much more accurate than what we are told in the Old Testament.
Who exactly were the Israelites?
The Israelites were, as I said earlier, descendants of Abraham. Through the years, they had formed different tribes. God tried to lead the Israelites and convince them that the one God was the true way, and that was the way that he wanted them to worship. There were times that the tribes were very separate from each other, but they did draw together and attempted to live in peace with the Egyptians. But it is true, they were the individuals that were chosen by God to attempt to begin a faith that would worship the one God instead of idols.
Okay, the Gospels tell us that you were born in Egypt. Is that accurate? And were you Egyptian or Israelite?
I was born in Egypt, and I was born an Israelite.
Okay. Could you tell us about your parents?
My parents were very loving people. I never got to know them because at the time of my birth, we were finding the Pharaoh was beginning to fear that the Israelites were gaining in strength and that they could represent a threat to his regime. So the Israelites at the time of my birth were under great pressure. The Pharaoh had ordered the killing of newborns, and my mother feared that that I would be killed. So she did indeed put me in a container and hide me in a swamp, hoping that she could come back in a future time, or that God would direct a way that my life would be saved. I was found by a slave of Egyptian royalty, and my life was saved.
Okay. Many like to say that you never existed. Why is there no record of your life or the Exodus in any Egyptian writings of the period?
When the Pharaoh sent his army after me, God saw that they were destroyed. The Pharaoh was so infuriated by the defeat that he ordered all writings of the existence of the Israelites to be destroyed. So therefore, nothing has survived to point to the fact that we ever even existed.
Could you tell us about your life as a member of the Pharaoh's family?
I was treated as royalty. My early life included being educated, being taught the life of royalty. My adopted mother and I became very close. I was never liked very much by the Pharaoh himself. He had a strong resentment towards Israelites and felt that they were secondary people. But I did enjoy all the trimmings of wealth and education. That period of my life is what really prepared me to lead in the future and to guide the Israelites to a land where they would not be persecuted.
Okay, we have a question from the chat room. They'd like to know what convinced you to leave your life of royalty and live the simple life as a messenger of God.
As I saw what was happening to the Israelites, I felt more and more pity for them. One day I saw a slave being whipped mercilessly, and I intervened. And since I was a fairly large size, I injured the Egyptian. As a reaction, they wanted to kill me for what I did. Even though my mother tried to protect me, we realized that it would have been far safer if I left the country, which I did.
Okay. Who was Aaron?
Aaron was my brother. He was an Israelite, and after I returned, I was reunited with him.
How old were you when you left Egypt?
I left Egypt when I was around 19 years of age. I realized that I really had no choice if I was going to live.
So where did you go?
I actually went to the lands where I would eventually lead my people. It was a place where there were nomadic tribes at the time. I built a relationship with several of those tribes, and I lived there for many years.
Okay, so why did you then eventually return to Egypt?
An angel came to me and told me that God requested that I return to Egypt and lead the Israelite people to the land which I had visited and where I was living at the time. He felt that if I did not return to Egypt, that the Pharaoh would eventually annihilate the Israelites. And being that God had created them to establish the concept of worship of the one God, he felt that I needed to return and lead them to safety.
Okay, was there really a burning bush?
No. There never was a burning bush. That is a story that was made up in the later drafters of the Old Testament. What really happened was that an angel came forth and that I received multiple messages from both my guides and from the angels.
Okay, we have a question from our chat room. Do the original tablets of stone with the commandments still exist?
God did not give me stone tablets with the commandments on them. What he did was he gave me what you would refer to as commandments, but which I thought at the time were simply guidance to how individuals were to live. What I did was I scratched the commandments on pieces of stone so that I would not forget them. But God never gave me the commandments in stone.
Did you ever see God?
No, no one sees God. He is an energy. What you see is the personification of his energy. Jesus was God incarnate, and he was the form of God when he walked the earth. But when you are on this side, you will never truly see God himself, because, very simply, he is that universal energy.
Okay, you said you received his messages from your guides. Did you have psychic abilities back then?
Yes. All my life I had received messages and guidance, and I would have had what you would now refer to as psychic abilities. I was actually given the ability to heal, to convince the Israelites that I could perform miracles and that I was capable of leading them. Okay, let's take a little break here. I need to get a drink of water because things are a little dry. So let's take a small break. We'll be back in about 3 minutes. Don't anybody leave. We have many, many more questions for Moses, and he is full, as you can tell, he is ready to answer them. So we will be right back.
Don't go away. Channeling History will return right after these brief messages. You've no doubt heard of Tango and Cash, Whiskey Tango Foxtrot. Perhaps it takes two to tango. Well, now, on the first and third Thursdays of each month, there's a show called Tango and Friends at 8 p.m. Eastern on the Para X Radio Network with your host, Bruce Tango. And yes, there will be at least two to tango on each episode, sometimes even more. There's going to be lots of topics and lots of guests you'll all know and lots of surprises. Tango and Friends every first and third Thursday of the month at 8 p.m. right here on the Para X Radio Network.
I am Oz, the great and powerful. Who are you?
If you please, I'm Dorothy, the small and meek. I've come to ask you...
Silence! The great and powerful Oz knows why you have come. Step forward, whippersnappers. Bring me the broomstick of a witch.
Martha's broom? But if we do that, we'll have to kill her to get it.
Bring me her broomstick, and I'll grant your request. Now go.
But what if she kills us first?
I said go!
What's that? What's that? It's Martha's castle guard. And look, there's her broom, right in front of the gate. Go get it. All right, I'll go in there, witch or no witch, guards or no guards. I'll tear them apart.
Oh, no, you won't. Don't think of leaving. My little party's just beginning. I always stir my cauldron Thursday nights at 9 p.m. Eastern on the Para X Radio Network. Now back off from that broom or I'll turn you into Toto's chew toy.
I do believe in witches. I do.
Have you ever wondered what Jesus and his followers would say if you could receive their messages today? In his new book, Spirits Speak, Channeling Jesus and the Holy Spirits, channeler and author Barry Strohm answers those questions for you. Using his gift of spirit communication, he brings you messages from such Holy Spirits as Moses, John the Baptist, Mary Magdalene, Mother Mary, Jesus, and even Mother Teresa and the Reverend Billy Graham. They discuss topics that are important for contemporary life in these troubled times. Spirits Speak, Channeling Jesus and the Holy Spirits is available on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and other booksellers. Signed copies are available on the author's website, spiritspredict.com. After reading this book, you will never again say, "What would Jesus say or do?"
Para X Radio.
Welcome back to Channeling History. Now, here are your hosts, Barry and Connie Strohm.
Welcome back. We have a lot more to go through with Moses, our guest. So why don't we get right back to the channeling?
Okay, Moses, when you returned to Egypt, how were you treated?
There were many that wanted to kill me when I returned because they had not forgotten why I had to leave in the past. My mother stepped in, my adopted mother stepped in, and basically assured that I was being treated as well as possible. The Pharaoh never really appreciated or liked me, so there were times that it was quite difficult. When I asked him if I could lead the Israelites out of Egypt, he became furious, and I actually thought I might have to consider leaving again. But my mother calmed him down, and I bided my time because I had been told by the angels that God would see to it that I would be able to lead the Israelites out of Egypt.
So how long did that process take, convincing him to let you leave with the Israelites?
It took quite a while, actually. It was not until there was a natural occurrence where the sky turned black. I actually thought that it was all God helping me. But in reality, there had been a volcanic eruption up in the area that you now refer to as Italy. And the eruption caused this huge black cloud that the wind blew over Egypt. As I realized when we got back on this side, God often uses natural occurrences for his own ends.
Okay. How did you convince the Israelites to follow you?
As at the time that I returned, things had gotten much worse for the Israelites. They had definitely become heavily involved slaves, and they were very unhappy with their lives. When I came back, they realized that I represented probably their best chance to live a free life and to worship as they hoped. So it took some convincing, but then when things started to happen, when the sky turned black, I told them that this was God sending a message that they should follow me to safety. So many things started to happen. There was famine. The dark cloud caused the crops not to grow. People were starving. There were insect infestations. And I kept telling the Pharaoh that this was all acts of God because the Egyptians had displeased him in the way they were treating the Israelites. So finally, he did realize that it would be best to let the Israelites leave, because at that point he was under a lot of pressure from his own people to do something to stop all of the terrible things that were happening to the Egyptian people.
Okay, so what was the reason the Egyptian people did not want the Israelites to leave?
They were truly accustomed to having slaves. They wanted the Israelites to stay so that they continued to be slaves, worked in their houses, do their building. So it took great discomfort for the people to understand that the only way they would find relief was to allow them to leave.
Okay. How many Israelites were involved in the Exodus?
We never really counted or understood how many there were. I would estimate that there were probably around 10,000 individuals involved when we began our journey.
Okay. We're told in the Gospels that the people were fed by God providing manna. What is manna? Or what was it?
That is a terminology that was created. When we started our journey, we were being led by angels and by guides. We would be taken to areas where we would find water, and where there was water in those days, there would be plants and there would be animals for us to eat. So God did provide food for us, but he did by leading us to areas where we would find water and food.
Okay, so why did the Pharaoh change his mind and send his army after you?
Once we left, conditions began to improve for the Egyptians. The Pharaoh was infuriated that the slaves were leaving his country. He decided that since the Israelites would no longer be available to be Egyptian slaves, that he would send the army after them. His intent was to capture the Israelites and bring them back to Egypt so that they could once again be his slaves.
How did you know that you were being pursued?
We were told by the angels. We were warned that the Pharaoh had changed his mind and they were going to try to take us back into captivity.
Did God really part the Red Sea?
He did not part the Red Sea as you know it today. What he did was there was an area of lake and marshland called the Reeded Sea. It was not a large body of water, but he did create a path for us through that water. And after we had come through, he did have the water return and destroy the Egyptian army.
Yeah. How long did it take the Israelites to cross the parted sea?
It took us around 2 days. As I said, it was not really a big area, but it was a lake large enough that it had enough water in it to destroy the Egyptian army when they tried to cross in the path that God had created for us.
Okay. Did you really wander the desert for 40 years?
No, that was made up. We did not wander in the desert for 40 years. The entire journey probably took us 3, maybe as long as 4 years. It was very difficult, but we did not wander in the desert for 40 years.
Okay. We have a question from the chat room that's kind of interesting, so I will insert it here. They would like to know if there are any descendants of you that are still alive today.
Yes. Although, after 3,500 years, it would be impossible to know. But I did marry, and I did have children, and my children did prosper and have children. So, there are people walking the earth who would have a distant bloodline to me.
Okay. During the time that the Israelites moved, were you with them at all times?
I was close to them at all times. There were times that I would go in advance and help find the next areas of water. There were times that we would have them stay at an oasis and wait until we scouted ahead and found where the next source of water and food would be. We were very careful that we did not get them stranded out in the desert where they would die.
Okay. The Gospels state that you fought and massacred the Midianites. I hope I pronounced that correctly. That included some women and children. Is that true?
No. They did resent the fact that we were crossing their area, and we did fight with them, and we did win. But we would certainly never, ever massacre women and children. God permits you to defend the weak and the defenseless, but he would never, ever allow us to simply massacre human souls indiscriminately.
Okay, let's get into a little more detail about the Ten Commandments. How exactly did you receive them? Did you go up on the mountain?
There were times that I would go into a quiet place to meditate. And during one of those meditations, the angels of God came to me, or perhaps it was God himself, but I was given orders of how the people should act and respond to one another. But they were very, very simple commandments.
Were there 10 of them?
No, there were actually 6 or 7 of them.
Okay. Can you go into any more detail about the commandments?
They were very simple. They were the most important was to love God and to love others and to treat others with respect. There was one where we were told to respect the family and to commit a man and a woman who were married to a lifetime together. As I said, they were really quite simple commands. In the days when the Gospels were created, the writers added what they thought would have been God's commandments. They were really quite simple.
Okay, who was Joshua?
Joshua was the individual that was assigned to follow up in protecting and guiding the Israelites after I was no longer physically capable of doing so.
How old were you when you succeeded your authority to him?
It was actually a gradual process, because as I aged, I realized that I was losing the strength and the ability to do much that was needed for strong leadership. I actually had a speech impediment and had trouble speaking to groups. On the journey, I trusted my brother Aaron in many times to speak for me. Because of that, there were members of our group that decided that I was very aloof and did not want to speak to the people. Joshua helped fulfill the role and actually worked with my brother. So it was a gradual process. By the time that I was probably 70 years old, I had pretty much allowed the authority to have passed to Joshua.
Did you ever personally reach Judea, the Promised Land?
Yes. I actually crossed over into Judea and saw where I thought the Israelites should permanently settle. I talked to the tribes of the area, and we negotiated a deal where they would be allowed to live and prosper, and in return, they would trade with the neighboring tribes.
Okay, how old were you when you passed away?
I was in my early 70s. Keep in mind this. In the days when we lived, there were no calendars that were kept. So it was impossible, really, for me to know when I lived, my age. All that I knew was that my health was deteriorating and that I was having more and more problems in my leadership capacity.
Yeah. Where were you buried?
I was buried at the base of Mount Nebo. I was not when I arrived in that area, I was not healthy enough to really climb the mountain or to do many things.
Okay, what is your current role in heaven?
In heaven, I currently do what is asked of me by God. I have helped guide individuals that were sent back by God. I help prepare life plans, and in fact, I assisted in your and Barry's life plans before you returned. So there is much that we do from this side in attempting to fulfill the commandments of God.
Well, thank you, Moses. Do you have a final message for our listeners this evening?
Yes. I would like to thank you for allowing me to return and to speak. I lived in a very difficult time. I lived long before the concept of Christianity ever occurred. We were Israelites, and we're going to be the fathers of what was to become the Jewish religion. I am also mentioned in the Quran, and I am a prophet for the Muslim faith as well. I wish that both the Muslim and Jewish faith would learn and follow the orders of God and learn to love one another and to live in peace. Peace is a lesson that has to be learned if human evolution is to continue on a positive path. Today, you are living in troubled times. Today, mankind has the ability to destroy itself through its weapons of mass destruction. The only thing or teaching that will allow positive future evolution is if humans learn to love one another. Today, you are faced with very difficult decisions. You can continue to hate, or you can have the love of God in your heart and show that love to others. If you do not follow the commandments of love, and love is a universal teaching of all religions, you need to follow that universal teaching and all will be well. So with these words, I'm going to say good night. Thank you for listening to me, and hopefully follow the commandments of love for one another. Good night.
Thank you, Moses, so much. In addition to being educational, it was very inspiring. Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much. So next week on our show, we're going to be talking to another famous religious subject from the past. We are going to interview Buddha. The intent of our show is not to favor any religion, any faith, or any organized, shall we say, religion, faith, whatever. We're going to try to stay as secular as we can, and we are going to try to bring you individuals from as many different historic religions and faiths as we can. So you can submit your questions for us in advance through our email. That was channeling history at channeling history on parax at gmail.com. That was channeling history on parax at gmail.com. So I hope that you will tell your friends about our show. We are having a lot of fun doing it. We love being able to channel the wonderful historic figures and to bring this information to you. And we hope that others will enjoy listening to us as well. So thank you for listening. Please join us on Sunday nights at 9 p.m. Eastern, 7 p.m. Mountain Time on the ParaX Radio Network. We will be back, and bless you, and may the love that whatever deity you refer to, may that love fulfill and be moved on to others. And so with that, we're going to say good night.
Good night, all. God bless you, and thank you for joining us.
Thanks for listening to Channeling History. Tune in again next week for another electrifying episode, as we never know who will make an appearance or who will come through the portal. Any rebroadcast or other use of this program without explicit permission is strictly prohibited. Copyright 2020. Our Story Begins by Kevin MacLeod, licensed through Incompetech.com.